Sahishnu Bhattacharya ji, a young and energetic scholar, a highly rigorous scholar who has contributed to our thinking in a very rigorous countering of the Western positions, Western misinterpretations. Sahishnu ji is a young scholar. He is now working as a researcher and assistant professor at B.R. Ambedkar University, Delhi. He has presented his papers on various topics. One wonderful topic he has covered was Kanyadana. There was a very bad interpretation of Kanyadana those days, and he has come up with a wonderful rejoinder to that misinterpretation. And he has come up with many such beautiful, rigorous, academically well-written papers on various topics. And today he's going to talk about another such academically rigorous topic, how the notion of sannyasa challenges Western social theory. Over to you, Sahishnu.
Yes. Thank you. While I may not be able to delve into the details of the sannyasa tradition itself, I mean, the other speakers on the symposium have said much. I'm going to focus on the significance of the sannyasa tradition. So what I am going to do is highlight what the significance of the sannyasa tradition is insofar as it relates to Western social theory. Now, the reason I talk about Western social theory is, for the most part, Indology and sociology done in India, Indian sociology and sociology about India, has followed those same patterns. It has not paid much attention to how India's Shastriya traditions have envisioned Samaj itself. My presentation will be short, but I hope that Professor Patriji will also add a commentary of his own to it. Now, if we talk about sannyas, if we think of it as an ascetic tradition, we will run into a mistake, because there have been ascetic traditions all over the world, in all cultures, Europeans, Africans, all kinds of, we have ascetic traditions. But there's a key difference here. If someone wants to study Europe and not pay attention to its ascetic traditions, they would still arrive at a well-rounded understanding of Europe. But when it comes to India, can India ever be understood or perceived without its sannyasis? From the various photographs to writings, to travel writings, to Puranas, everywhere, sannyasis are everywhere. As if they are an integral part of whatever India is. That tells us something, that for Indians, sannyasis are a part of the social order. They are a part of Samaj, and they are part of how Samaj is thought about and understood. Now, within the 4 ashramas that exist, and the older Dharma Sutras place them in different kramas, different orders. Apastamba, for instance, lists the Grihastha ashram first, giving it more importance. And then it changes, because these have also evolved, with only the Brahmacharya ashram being common to all. Vasishtha, interestingly, goes so far as to say that like rivers, like many rivers which join the ocean, all the ashramas merge into the Grihastha, which is a way of saying that the Grihastha ashram is the sustenance for all the other. Some acharyas are of the form that these ashrams are vikalpas, that is to say, after Brahmacharya, one chooses one in accordance with their adhikar. Some acharyas have said it is sequential. Others still have said that it is sequential only for Brahmanas. But what we cannot deny is that a stable tradition existed of discourse on this. Active social imagination existed. And it is not something that can be analyzed in isolation. whenever we talk about sannyasa, we have to understand that it is one ashram out of a couple of others. And that whenever the Dharma Shastras, the Dharma Sutras, talk about the sannyas, ashram, they are essentially looking at a larger picture. They're looking at Samaj as a whole, and they're looking at it through various dimensions of jati, varna, and ashram. Throughout the decades, throughout the centuries, in fact, when Indologists and anthropologists have attempted to understand India, they have almost always gotten stuck at how to understand either jati or varna or ashram. INDICA has over time organized many symposiums on various of these dimensions. This one happens to be on sannyas. What I want to trace out is how, keeping sannyasa in mind, if we look at the West, if we look back at the West, instead of looking at India through the gaze of the West, what we may realize goes wrong whenever the West tries to understand India's social traditions. If we look at the early modern period in Europe, we see that society as a object of study does not quite exist. There are treatises on the state, there are treatises on the political realm, but society, no. What we have is histories of people. There are histories of civilizations, histories of countries. So we have a history of the Arabs, a history of the French, but society as an analytical category does not seem to emerge in the early modern period yet. But soon after, sometime during the 17th to 18th centuries, a new kind of thinking starts to emerge in how we theorize about society, which is through social structures, social systems, and social institutions. Now, these three terms you will recognize are now germane over all sociological and anthropological work. It's either a structure or a system or an institution, without which we cannot even look at society. Whereas we could probably think of Samaj in terms of its dharma, dhriyate, what sustains, or we can think about sthiti or worry about samsthapan or punarsamsthapan. The guiding idea for this early modern period theorization of society was progress. But this progress is not the kind of progress we have in political discourse today in the sense of saying progressive. This was the idea, influenced by evolutionary thoughts, that society was moving along a certain evolutionary path and that it was unilinear. All societies would converge at a higher state. And that would be radically different from whatever it is. That was the kind of progress. So society was something that was in flux. More influential was the approach of the Marxists. Marx, for whom society, there was nothing separately as society as simply a culmination of ideologies. For him, the history of all societies, as he famously said, was simply the clash of ideologies, a history of ideologies. So, and society as an analytical category is what results from that clash. So, in the end, it becomes all about power and domination. So, that gives us a clue as to why all Western studies of India, or at least those studies of India that use a Western model, they seem to come one way or the other and focus on exploitation or oppression, one way or the other. Because within the very methodology of how we look at society, we are trained only to look at power and domination. Modern sociological theories were originally born out of these national sociologies. I use the word national in quotes, which is a way of referring to it, their ethnic senses. Like I said, Arabs, French, English, etc. But sometime during the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th centuries, European thinkers began to think in a different way. Voltaire, for instance, recognized when in his studies that there were two empires. One is the empire of nature and one is the empire of custom. What does he mean to say in simpler terms? He says that all societies, all cultures, there's something uniting them. There's something common in all of them. We have basic needs. There are some things that are common everywhere. And there is also another empire of customs which spreads variety. We are all human beings. We look a certain way, we behave in a certain way, we have certain urges, we eat certain things, but we also are differentiated by variety. Maybe the climates influence us, maybe our vocations, or what we do, what we cultivate, etc., etc. So throughout the 17th to 19th centuries in Europe, this different kind of thinking, and this was aided and inspired by the increasing contact of European powers with colonial cultures. So the more they came in contact with different cultures, the more they tried to understand it and reduce it and somehow digest it into a form that they could comprehend. A shift began to occur. What was this shift? So previously they understood difference. Maybe these are the Arabs, they have their own dharma. These are the French, they have their own dharma. But now, what was difference is now injustice. Whatever was being perceived as something different from us, and therefore it could be fine. You are different, I am different, you have your own laws, I have my laws, you live and I live in harmony. We don't have to live together maybe, but we live and let live. But now, the moment that difference starts being perceived as injustice, something else starts to happen. Underlying this shift is two assumptions. One is that of a unilinear evolution and a Eurocentric universalism. In other words, colonial powers, colonial thinking, led by the intellectuals of the age, could now point to different cultures, not unjust cultures, different cultures, and then say that those represent a less evolved form. Over time, they will come to resemble us. We are the more evolved form. So this became a justification, a rationale for their colonizing missions disguised as civilizing missions. So previously, where there was difference, now there was injustice and of the barbarians, so to speak. Notable here is the ideas of Spencer, who believed in this unilinear kind of social evolution. And then this kind of social thinking crystallizes and institutionalizes itself in the thought of Emile Durkheim, who believed there were comparable social units beneath the diversity, and therefore the task of all sociology would be to bring those to light. So even though there are differences, there was this Eurocentric assumption that we could bring to light a science of society, a sociology, so to speak, a social science, whose whole point would be to eradicate the difference and find what is common. What has only been lately pointed out in the works of S.N. Balagangadhara is that not all differences are comparable. That was something that was missed. Beyond these sociologists, like the influential works of Marx and Engels, they ignored all tradition and community. And instead, they looked at society as a whole unit, comprising simply of individual labor. So man was simply what he produced himself. That was a very labor-centric view and did not acknowledge any other ontological sources. Now, that was another way of envisioning society which leaves no space for the kind of imagination we see here in India. Sadly, however, those same models have, over the last 50 years, been used in understanding India. Beyond these, there is another thinker who deserves mention in this context, which is of Ferdinand Tönnies. He's a German thinker, about Durkheim's contemporary, who pointed out that there were two kinds of society. He used the German terms Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. Gemeinschaft referred to a more organic kind of community. And Gesellschaft referred to a more modern, urban, and anonymized, individualized society. For them, for him, he argued that Europe had seen the disintegration of community and was only looking at Gesellschaft. Now, we in India can actually observe both. If I take a local example, if we go to an Indian village where we don't have, let's say, every house does not have fixed addresses, and there's a postman who has never been here before, and he asks, I have a letter for this name. Any person will tell you that person lives there. A little village lives like a community. We know who you are. We are going to be there for you whenever you need help. We may be separate, but we are part of a whole. We are linked together. And compare that to what our modernity and urbanity does. Let's say you go to a high-rise flat in Noida. You live in somewhere on the 30th floor, and there's someone else who lives on the 20th floor. You have never seen them, never heard of them. If they died, you would feel no grief. That is the example of a Gesellschaft. So Tönnies argued that what has happened to Europe through modernization and throughout the 20th century is essentially that it has lost all older bonds of Gemeinschaft, of community, as now and is now only associational. Durkheim used this distinction and he developed on it to point out that what is so key about modern society as the West understands it and studies it is that it is centered around the political state. So whenever the modern sociology or anthropology tries to understand society, sooner or later the state will come into the picture, because life is now all forms of social life is administered by the state. It is inextricably linked to the state, all its forms, all its organizations, and how we study it. Therefore, today, as it stands, Western social theorization is stuck on a bipolar spectrum. On one hand, it has not progressed beyond the individual. And on the other hand, what kind of groups exist? Can we really think of ashramas or jatis or varnas? These do not exist. What do exist is only ideological group interests, and with no sense of tradition or community. So all sociological analysis is reduced to this tension between the individual on one hand and an ideological group interest. If you want to see a practical example of this, if we look at anthropological studies of sannyasis or mathas in India, you will notice, let us take the example of the Ramakrishna mission. Now, many books have been written on it, some by insiders, mostly by outsiders to the tradition. Whenever they do so, they have two choices. Either you focus on the individuality of certain figures like Ramakrishna himself or Sharada or Vivekananda, or you look at the organization in a corporatized form. Because there are no other ways. Whenever we switch to an English language and write in the language of the Western Academy, a shift in our lenses happens. Whenever we try to organize this knowledge, we end up acceding to and accepting this tension between either an individual figure or a competing ideological interest. So in my view, and this is mostly a summarization of what I'm driving at, is that the very notion of ashramas, whether it be Sanyāsa or anything else, give us vital information as to how non-Western forms of social organization have existed, and not only existed, they have evolved productively and thrived, which must therefore inspire us to imagine newer ways of theorizing the social in India and, if necessary, also globally. The second point is that ashramas have also clearly evolved. We cannot really think of the sannyasa ashram as something fixed, as the speakers before me have showed through various texts and their lived experiences, that there is so much difference there also. if we go back to the Vedic times, we may not find this ashrama in that particular form. Yet we find that there are munis there are rishis there are Brahmins who pursue a kind of life. And if we look at it through that angle, we may hypothesize that these four divisions of the ashramas are simply a reorganization of what existed, maybe through different ways, but it is a deep continuity. And this would help us to see dharmashastras or any texts on the sannyasa ashrama not as merely historical evidence like philologists or Indologists have done. So when we read these texts, they are not merely to explain that this is the sannyasa tradition of India. No, we have also to recognize that they are a shastra in their own sense, which is a continuing discourse on a tradition that is active and productive, and it is an engaged theorization. It is a theorization that has not stopped and should not stop. And finally, we this is also a call to action that we must also not limit ourselves to thinking that these ashrams would remain in the same way that they have been textualized and institutionalized. Their further evolutions are not unilinear ones, but multilinear evolutions are possible, and newer forms of dharma may and must also be allowed to emerge in a world that is globalized, connected, and urbanizing. These constitute the short remarks that I wanted to make. My talk is rather short. I would request Dr. Nagaraj Pathareji to follow up with some comments if he would.
Thank you very much, Sahishnu ji. As always, you have made wonderful, good points, good new points about the way the Western social theory missed the whole point of Sanyāsa tradition. I don't see any questions in the question and answer box, but my own observation is that you made wonderful observations about how the theory itself develops, the social theory itself develops, and how Sanyasa tradition actually creates a pressure on that social theory to be different. The fact of Sanyasa tradition creates a pressure on that social theory to be different. Thank you very much.